Welcome to the Weekly Squeak, your weekly geeky squeak with me, an increasingly tired Christian Chiller. Tired through lack of sleep, tired through, anyway. I don't think I need to go into details of how everyone feels right now. It's one of these strange times when you can just say a couple of words and everyone kind of knows what you mean. It's actually a somewhat unifying experience, albeit a not so positive one. Anyway, this week I have a few links for you as always, and then I have an interview with Gaurav Deshpande of TigerGraph talking about their distributed graph database. But first, let's begin with the links. And as hard as I try to keep them a COVID-19 free zone, it's getting harder and harder to find much else to talk about or how it all connects somehow. So I'm just going to go for it. There's a few things that interested me, somewhat relating, some not. Let's just see how we go. All right, let us begin. First, a post from Tom Rafferty, who I've been following on Twitter for some time, on podcasting tips. These, I found, a lot of them were sort of subscribing and buying services, which may or may not be a good thing to do, but it exposed me to a couple of new tools I'd not heard of, which was interesting, some of which I will look into at some point. I'm starting to work on a few new shows, more of that later, with a few co-hosts and who aren't in the same place as me. So trying to figure out how to get good quality audio recordings from people is an extra challenge. I usually use something called Audio Hijack when I record interviews, but I'm still just recording the VoIP side of the recording, which means it's compressed. It doesn't matter so much with this kind of format, but with some newer format shows I'm working on, I'd like better quality. And we are currently experimenting with Zencastr and options like that. And he mentions one in here that I hadn't heard of called Squadcast, which I looked into. I mean, a lot of these tend to be quite expensive is the main problem, especially if you're starting a show. They tend to go from, Zencastr has the same thing. They have their hobbyist plan, but it gives you compressed audio, which might as well use Audio Hijack. And then the plan up is like $20 a month and not much in between. And that's kind of been my main experience with a lot of these tools. He also mentions a couple of audio editors I've never heard of, including the intriguingly titled Hindenburg Journalist Pro. I may give that a go at some point. I'm relatively happy with my workflow, which is, say, Audio Hijack and then Adobe Audition. I have a Creative Cloud subscription. Yeah, I've had it for some time. It doesn't seem worth changing right now. But if you are getting new into this and you don't have any of these pre-existing workflows or tool chains, then it'd be worth having a look at this post to get a slightly different and mostly cross-platform, which is good perspective on options for leveling up your game with your podcast ideas. Next, a regular on the Weekly Squeak from Stephen J. Vaughan, an article on ZDNet about the open source firmware versions for a CPAP machine to turn it into a ventilator. This caught my interest for several reasons. Firstly, because there has been this whole issue with a shortage of ventilators in certain countries and not here in Germany. In fact, we have an abundance and we're bringing in other people, which is interesting for people who suffer particularly bad from COVID-19. But my wife actually has a CPAP machine, which are more common, albeit relatively expensive. So I was interested when I first heard about this, and when I saw this article with a bit more detail, it turns out she has the one that actually can be hacked. I don't know what the legality of all this. Hers is in theory on lease from the health insurer and actually phones home every now and then. Yes, even in Germany, which is quite surprised me when I heard that. I wouldn't be surprised if I heard it in the States or something like that. But in Germany, where they're very privacy focused, the fact that she had a machine that phoned home took me by surprise. In fact, when we were in Japan last year, she started getting messages from them because it wasn't connecting to the mobile network, obviously. I think it only works Europe-wide. Anyway, so I'm sure if she decided to hack the firmware to turn it into a ventilator for someone's use, they would probably, I don't know. It's interesting. Would they be happy with that? I mean, it's a very interesting point to make. I don't know if anyone has an answer to that. Maybe I should put a call out on social media to get some German experts to weigh in on whether that would actually be an okay thing to do or not here. Interesting. But anyway, there's a bit more detail on this post about what that entails and how effective the machine is. I don't know how many of these machines there are in the wild. I'm not sure if the article mentions it. Let's have a quick look. No, but I think they're reasonably common with people who have sleep apnea and things like that. So, and I guess cheaper than a proper quote unquote ventilator. So, could be an interesting idea if there was really a problem in the future. But yeah, the legal side is something that could be interesting, and we've already seen cases of well-meaning researchers open sourcing mask parts and things like that and getting sued, which is kind of bad. And I remember here when that came out at the time on a show I was listening to, the host talking about how people will probably remember the companies that acted as good citizens in this whole phase and those who didn't, and hopefully remember that with their loyalty moving forward in the future. A post here on The Guardian. I don't think there's an author because it's just photos. Quite fascinating. I love sort of pictures like this. I think I've I should tell you what it is first. It's a photo of planes grounded right now in various airports around the world. And it just looks so strange and sparse. These giant machines all sat together, sitting there doing nothing. I think I have shared before links on tank graveyard and things like that. I love these kind of desolate desolate kind of scenes with these vast machines sitting there filling them, and some of these photos look amazing. And also there's a picture here of a Ryanair planes, a budget carrier here in Europe, with all the stairs as well sat next to them. And then you see the different liveries of the various planes all kind of sat next to each other, in a weird sort of dance formation. It's something kind of strangely beautiful about all these odd-looking photos. The British Airways ones, especially because they're on kind of a bank that I think they're maybe on a runway actually, and it's slightly rounded. No, it can't be a runway then, and they're sort of undulating, almost like they're swimming in a river. It's some quite strangely beautiful photos. So if any of that appeals to you, go and have a look. Finally, in the COVID-19 roundup, this is something that caught my eye because I had been wondering. I mean, this is not the first time that the world has faced a pandemic. And actually, if you look at the kind of grand scheme of things, the numbers in this one are relatively low, but we have to take into account our modern healthcare and that kind of the scale of acceptable death these days is different than it was in the past. It's also interesting, of course, because we have larger populations now in the world as well. I guess that is a sign of progress. And this, especially just before a few months ago, I was reading London Necropolis, something like that, or Necropolis, Story of London's Dead, or something like that. And there was a few stories in there about plague victims and the numbers for the plague victims. And when you consider this is when London was a lot smaller than it is now, they were phenomenal. The sorts of deaths that are happening in some countries, total happening each week. And this is when there's less of a population. It would be, I know people have a tendency to misuse the word decimated, but I think literally decimated, and possibly even more, actually. And this is a post from The Conversation by Ute Lotz-Heumann, looking at Samuel Pepys's diaries from some of those plague times in London and comparing how similar they are in some ways. There was a practice of social distancing. There were people flogging inaccurate and useless ways of curing things. There was inappropriate blaming. There was worry. There was economic downturn. And then actually, if you dive in, you read the numbers again and you realize how large the numbers for plague were. But of course, it was a very different time. We didn't really have hospitals we did, but they were different, probably not very hygienic. And I think that's been one of the interesting outcomes of this when it's hopefully over will be that, the things like the plague caused us to realize certain things about the way we lived and that they should change, especially around hygiene. And whilst we're way more hygienic than we were then, there are certain things that I think people have realized about how filthy we can be and be more hygienic in certain ways. And those of us a little bit like me who've always been a bit OCD about that sort of thing will be very welcome of that when that does happen. So yeah, interesting. We will see what the sort of outcomes of that are in the long run. But have a look. I think Samuel Pepys's diaries are probably in the public domain if you want to read more detail as well. All right, getting out of COVID now. So my next post is another one from ZDNet, from Liam Tung on Google's Flutter updates and announcements. I put this in because I actually was working on some content for Flutter. I've been working on some apps as well, for some posts that have not been published yet, hopefully soon. And I have always been wanting to try Flutter and Dart more for cross-platform development, especially as now it is true cross-platform. They have not only mobile targets, they have macOS targets, web targets as well. And it's sort of familiar-ish language. I found some of it slightly confusing, which you can read when this post is published, but I got there in the end. And this new version adds a lot of things that start to make it look even more compelling, and as a lot of people has rumored, maybe as a replacement for Java in the Android ecosystem, especially, and some of Google's tooling and languages. They've had a large increase in developers, 2 million. Big uptick in enterprise use, probably that cross-platform nature there is what's driving that. And then with this big uptake in developers all around the world, actually, which is quite nice to see, they're starting to change their branching and release model to help with regular releases, not breaking things so much and getting them out, and et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of the tooling around Flutter is also very good. I was using the Visual Studio Code extension, and it makes it quite usable. There's a few oddities occasionally with things. Also, I found that installing it with Homebrew, macOS package manager, was not seamless. I don't know why it's not in there properly, but there is kind of an unofficial formula that solves that for you. But yeah, if you haven't looked at the language, now is probably a good time. On the subject of alternatives to Flutter, I'm not working for ZDNet. I wish I were, but here's another post from there, from Catalin Campanu. There was another small NPM module that broke a lot of things. It's another left pad all over again. This one was equally innocuous, which is promised to tell developers if something is a promise or not. And promises have become a big pattern in JavaScript recently, so I guess a lot of people use it. And it broke because it didn't conform to certain standards, and then projects that wanted to conform to those standards broke because it had a dependency that didn't conform to those standards. And yeah, a lot of projects suddenly weren't able to release or build, et cetera, with these new dependencies. No actual real crashes, but just compile errors. And then, of course, it was fixed soon after. But still, it's amazing how even in a few hours of problems, the amount of drama that can be caused by just this small package that apparently is very, very minimal in terms of code as well. Good old NPM and JavaScript, eh? Next, this is an article from Wired from Nicole Kirby, although this was also widely reported, kind of state of the union, as it were, European Union, on GDPR after 2 years, and how the European Union shows its unique colours again, in that it's always kind of been up to each state to enforce, and most of the companies in the European Union that were really the targets of GDPR are mostly based in Ireland. And Ireland isn't particularly interested in in finding them. And then the others in other countries have been somewhat minimal. I think there was one against British Airways and one against Marriott, which were somewhat more significant. And then a lot of other small ones that basically most companies would just shrug off of that sort of size. So it's another unfortunate example of how European Union ideas and ideals are up to each country to enforce. And if a country is not very interested in enforcing them, and I think a lot of this policy was really flagshipped by certain countries, shall we say, who have limited remit in their own jurisdictions to enforce it because of the companies that are based there, then is it very useful? I guess this doesn't look at the other consequences of this sort of freedom of data access and things like that European citizens have also enjoyed that don't necessarily make the high-profile news because it's just little old us doing it and not someone being fined 500 million or whatever. But I suppose that was always going to be the headline news anyway in each case. So I'm not sure. I think it has been successful in that way. Whether it's been successful in the fining companies, who knows? I mean, just because you fine a company, does that mean success? Maybe it's good, because if they're not being fined, then it means maybe they've tidied up their act. So it's very hard to judge just based on that to measure. But we all know lies, damn lies, and statistics. So who knows? Anyway, GDPR 2 years later, sort of making a difference. And finally, in the and finally section, this is definitely an and finally item from Inverse by Ray Pauletta. Why do cats slow blink at their owners? I found this quite interesting. Our cat does this quite a lot and stares at us quite a lot, and I was never really sure how to interpret it. I mean, interpreting cats and their meaning has always been something of a challenge anyway, and confounded scientists. And this had some interesting advice that they're usually doing it actually when they're relaxed around you, and if they're staring, they're stressed. And slow blinking back at them is actually recommended. And if they are staring at you, either slow blink back at them or look away. Classic case with cats of, yes, do what the cat wants. And there's a wonderful little picture here of a cat slow blinking in the article, which you can enjoy. And apparently the slow blink is a little bit of I love you, or your kitty kiss. So they do like you when they're doing it. So do it back. I wonder if they perceive that through glasses. Hard to tell. But cats are way smarter than we sometimes think. So yeah, enjoy too. And if you have a kitty in your house, then give it a nice slow blink from me. That was my articles for the week. And now an interview with Gaurav Deshpande of TigerGraph.
I'm Gaurav Deshpande. I'm the Vice President of Marketing at TigerGraph. TigerGraph is a graph database and analytics platform. Mm-hmm. So in terms of our technical qualifications, Chris, for your audience, we are built on MPP, massively parallel processing methodology, which means we are inherently parallel in all aspects of our operations. That gives a huge advantage. The second major differentiator as a graph database, because there are a lot of graph databases in the market, is that we are a native graph database, which means we represent objects natively inside as vertex for the business object and edge for the relationships. We don't have a graph layer on top of a relational backend. We actually have a native graph database underneath. So native graph and the parallel nature of the underlying platform because of MPP are the two key factors that then drive performance that is typically 40 to 300 times faster than any of the competing products.
Okay. Let's unpack that statement a little bit for people who aren't familiar with what it means. What is a graph database?
Absolutely. So graph database, easiest way to think about it is anytime you are representing, let's take an example of what a traditional relational database is, and then I'll contrast that with what a graph database does. In a relational database like Oracle, like DB2, you would have each business object typically represented with the table. So product information is contained in one table. Customer information is contained in another table. Order information in another one, payment transactions for banks in a separate one. Claims for healthcare industry would have multiple tables, one for prescription claims, one for treatment claims, one for doctor visit claims, and things like that. So everything, think of literally the landscape as islands of tables. Mm-hmm. And then there are foreign keys that are connecting those up. That's how relational database works. Essentially a way to tables that contain information about business objects, and then you have multiple rows, and then you have multiple columns that represent different features within that or attributes. So that's the typical structure of a relational database. Now, coming to the graph database represented exactly as you would imagine it should be represented, which is products, customers, orders, claims, financial transactions. They are all connected together with business objects represented by vertex. For example, let's take our example, right? Chris Ward runs a podcast, Gregarious Mammal. Chris Ward is a writer for D-Zone and several other major publications. He's interviewing right now Gaurav Deshpande, who is the Vice President of Marketing at TigerGraph. If I were to ask you to draw this on a piece of paper, you would draw one circle for Gaurav Deshpande. You'll probably draw TigerGraph on top and then draw a line between those to say, he works for TigerGraph as the Vice President of Marketing. then he'll draw a relationship between Gaurav and Chris, and that relationship is, currently Chris interviewed Gaurav on this particular day on 25th of March. That's exactly how the graph databases represent, which means essentially the entities are pre-connected, and therefore when you're trying to do analysis of relationships between Gaurav and Chris or Chris and TigerGraph, you can go from Chris to Gaurav, who Chris interviewed on 25th of March, and go from Gaurav to TigerGraph to say there's a two-level of connection, two-level connection or a two-hop connection between Chris and Gaurav, Chris and TigerGraph. And there's one level of connection, separation between Chris and Gaurav because Chris directly interviewed Gaurav. So this idea of traversing relationships is directly because the entities are pre-connected in a graph database is simply a matter of walking through that particular adjacency. You don't require an index for it. It's index-free adjacency. So that's the reason why for your technical audience, they'll appreciate this, is that you don't need to do table joins like you do in case of relational databases. Because you don't need table joins, the relationship analysis is very easy and much faster than a relational database.
Mm-hmm. And I guess graph databases have come to certainly help represent a lot of modern applications. I do remember a reasonably long time ago now, I suppose, doing lots of nested joins and it being very, very bad on performance on web applications especially. And I guess graph sort of replaces this concept that was meant for a particular purpose and had kind of passed its purpose. And graphs now represent how we really look at lots of data now.
Yeah, it just helps you exactly, Chris. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It's all these joins, both joins across tables, forming different kind of star joins, or even the recursive joins within a particular table when you're trying to understand relationships between different objects within that particular table. Both of those recursive join as well as star joins is something that is very computationally intensive, and all of your audience will appreciate this if they have tried to do this to do relationship analysis between relational databases. It takes a lot of time. It's very time consuming. And as the pace of the economy increases, let's take the current example, what's happening right now in the markets, right? In the financial markets, in the economy. We have COVID-19 impact to the financial. If you just take the financial impact of COVID-19, a lot of local businesses are shut down. A lot of businesses have only 10 days of cash on hand, smaller businesses like bars, restaurants, even boutique hotels. So there is a huge cash flow impact for these businesses. Understanding things like that, even from a local government perspective or a county government perspective or a bank's perspective that has loans that is holding loans for different aspects within those small businesses. Doing the impact analysis by itself, understanding the relationship of what's happening in terms of the virus and how it's affecting each of those businesses. Every time you're required to do these massive joins to understand these relationships, and that takes a very long time. And in this day and age, you really don't have the luxury of time or the computing resources to do the deep analysis with the joins. So this is where every time you're trying to do relationship analysis, graph databases are a natural choice. And in case of TigerGraph, the reason why we built TigerGraph, I'm going back to 2012 now. The reason why Dr. Yushu, the CEO and founder, built TigerGraph is because he was working in Twitter before that and Teradata before that. And he realized that he could not find a graph database that will actually scale for the large amount of data that Twitter wanted to put. So Twitter wanted to build a social graph of the world by understanding relationships of everybody with everybody else. Even back in 2012, that's talking about hundreds of millions of users, to be able to load up their relationships and do relationship analysis across hundreds of millions of users was a really, really difficult endeavor back in 2012. So he actually set out to create a graph database that will actually scale And he being from an MPP, massively parallel processing background, that was his PhD work with University of California at San Diego. That was his work at IBM Watson Labs, which was one of his first jobs out of UC San Diego. He went back to his roots and say, can I build a native graph database that has parallel processing built into every aspect of it? And that's what started TigerGraph. A little bit of a background about history for your viewers, for your listeners of last 9 years.
Let's have a bit of a dig into some of the features of TigerGraph. So, as far as I can tell, you have your own query language, GSQL. Although actually, no, you say it's SQL-like. I mean, you say it's SQL-like, but are they comparable, or do graph databases require a different sort of query language as well?
Yeah, so there are currently, to answer your question, the language is semantics-wise is very similar. At least GSQL is, GraphSQL is, because we have implemented the familiar clauses like from, where, select, what you would expect from a relational background. The differences mainly are the graph-specific constructs, such as, let's take an example. If I'm walking from Chris to Gaurav to TigerGraph, right? That particular walk is simply an arrow statement. Imagine there's an arrow. I'm writing down Chris to Gaurav and Gaurav to TigerGraph. It's simply pointing an arrow between us and walking that straight, that path between us and back to TigerGraph. That's something that construct obviously doesn't exist in the relational world because there's no equivalent of it in the semantics for the relational world. So there we have added our own semantics that makes sense. And other than that, select from, where, all the stuff that you would expect as a SQL programmer is there in GSQL. Now, what we are doing is we are working with other graph database vendors and also people like Oracle on the SQL side. So we are teamed up with Oracle. We're working with Neo4j, which is an open source graph database, kind of the granddaddy of graph databases. We are working with them and other players in the industry to define a standardized language for the graph. And that is a part of an ISO effort that's going on. Okay. It's called GQL, or Graph Query Language. So by 2021, that standard will be first set of standards will be published. And our objective is to have support that. Think of GSQL as a superset of SQL, as well as in terms of the construct, because it has semantics that is, basically everything that has a SQL equivalent, we have taken that and taken as is into GSQL. Everything that doesn't have equivalent in graph, we have created our own semantics for that, and we would be supporting that as well as the GQL, the standard graph query language, as it comes out. So the minute it comes out, it's a great thing because people have been building applications on top of TigerGraph, large, massive applications. We'll continue to backward support our GSQL syntax. And as we take the best parts of the GSQL syntax into the GQL, we'll also support the final agreed upon GQL that's standard for the industry. So that will just take away all of this requirement to learn multiple query languages for the developers. A typical ramp-up time for GSQL is only about 4 to 6 hours for somebody who is a SQL familiar person. So we don't have more than half a day of ramp-up time for GSQL, like I mentioned, because the semantics is identical.
And from memory, I do remember, I think SQL is an ISO standard. So it's interesting to see it's taken the best part of 10 years for the major vendors to make that happen. And I don't mean that from your perspective. I mean that from the ISO body perspective. It takes a long time.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. No, this is wonderful, Chris, because especially for technical people like you and me, we have been waiting. This is the second query language for databases after nearly 30 years, right? What was it, 30 years back that we had?
And we could wait for
I'm definitely ready for it in my lifetime, for sure. Yeah.
One of the other features that jumps jumps out of me as being quite interesting is this feature you have, multi-graph. I kind of interpret it as the ability for well, why didn't you explain it? You're probably better explaining it than me.
Of course. Of course. No. And the way you're thinking about it, intuitively, exactly how it is, right? Let me take an example and let me clarify. Let's take an example of a large bank, right? Large bank has different roles within it, different divisions and departments within it. Certain information like a consumer's credit rating, for example, or information related to that is accessible for a part of the organization, right? That needs to know about that. Certain information such as your bank account balance, whether you are overdrawn, whether you have sufficient balance to clear a particular type of check, whether you have been paying your payments on time, at a high level, that information is generally available to most of the bank employees. Also, there are different divisions. There is the retail banking division, there is the mortgage division, there is the credit card division. And depending on the role of the employee needs to have access to the right segment of information that they are supposed to look at, and other information that's sensitive information or that's not relevant to their job, they shouldn't be able to see. The whole idea about multi-graph is the ability to segment a domain into multiple domains, assign role-based access for those, and then say, John can look at everything for retail banking, but he's not going to look at mortgages or credit cards because that's not part of his role. So this ability to do individual graphs for each of the business units, for example, or each of the product lines, and the ability for people to have access to it or not, depending on their role, is what multi-graphs are used for. Now, of course, as you can imagine, every large organization has fairly complex requirements around this. And so most of our customers are Fortune 500 customers. And then we have really, really innovative startups that are building very cool solutions on top of TigerGraph. So we have both ends of the spectrum. So for the first category of the Fortune 500 large companies, for example, top 4 out of the 5 top global banks use TigerGraph for fraud detection, right, and credit risk assessment. So these large banks, for example, have very stringent requirements about who can see what information, because for the most part, our financial information is very, very important and has to be very, very secure as you open up access. So even for analysis, I don't want to have somebody have access to sensitive information when their job role does not require access to that. So that's where bringing information together is fantastic in a single graph database. But if you're not able to segment it based on the roles, it's not useful or usable for a large organization. So that's the reason why we added multi-graphs around October of 2017, if memory serves me right. And that is the driver of that particular requirement.
And I guess tying reasonably nicely into that, for the non-technical staff members who want to be able to define these rules, create relationships, and then share information and access information they need access to. As far as I can tell, you have this Graph Studio product or feature as well. That
we do, yeah. And in fact, absolutely, yeah. In fact, this 3.0 announcement that we sent out last week on 16th is got to do with that, because Graph Studio is something that came about as a requirement to say, I have lots of visualization tools at the Fortune 500 company. I have relational tables visualization tools like Cognos, like Tableau, a host of them, right? Hyperion, Oracle. But I really don't have anything that allows me to visualize graph data in an interconnected format. So Graph Studio is our user interface that can be used for defining schema in a graph database, modifying schema. It's also used to write queries. So it's also an SDK, full-blown SDK. You can write queries there, you can run queries, you can look at results. So as a part of this Graph Studio, the 3.0 announcement that we made last week, Chris, is that taking that Graph Studio that's always been used by data scientists in Fortune 500 companies. Some of the biggest organizations are already using it, but we wanted to take it to the business users, not just to the developers and the architects and the data scientists. Can I move it back all the way to business users to be able to use it? And as we started looking at it, two requirements popped out. So one requirement was, if I'm a business user, if I'm a data scientist who is starting out in my career, I'm not somebody who's going to write ETL jobs, extract, transform, and load jobs to extract information out of a relational database and then be able to load it and then manually create the schema. It can be done very easily in Graph Studio, but that's a lot of work. Can I remove that first dependency? So can I literally get the schema out of a relational database, create the graph schema, and also get the data out of the relational database, load it up into a graph without writing a single piece of code? So the first feature that we added in Graph Studio, Chris, is no code migration from relational database. Mm-hmm. Literally, there is a screenshot that we are staring at here, which has a button called Migrate from RDBMS. You click on that button. It prompts you with two options right now in 3.0, Postgres and MySQL. We'll be adding more as we go through future releases. You select the store that you have in the backend. You enter the user ID information, password. Then you select the tables that you want to migrate and the attributes that you want to select from those tables. And then you can choose to load all of the tables. You can choose to load only a sample of the data. And you can do that stuff entirely through UI. So that was the first thing that we did, is let's take away that problem of having to go to IT, having to go to a technical person and saying, write me this particular extract from a relational database. Let's try to provide that capability right inside Graph Studio. The second capability that we added after that, Chris, is to say, once the data is inside the Graph Studio, I don't want to write GSQL, even if it's easy to learn, even if it's SQL familiar and very leverages all of that semantics. Why should I have to write that to do graph analysis? Can I just point and click and select things just like I do on my iPhone, and can I make it as simple as that? So the second feature that we added, which is no-code graph analytics with Visual Query Builder, it's based on the idea of the visual data modeling and analysis to say, if I can click on something, if I can enter a selection criteria, if I can enter the filter criteria, I should be able to do complex analysis without learning a single line of code. So kind of taking that idea of no code and applying it both to getting data from relational, schema from relational, and then once it's inside the graph, actually applying complex analysis to the graph data without writing a single piece of code. Mm-hmm. That particular second feature is called Visual Query Builder. Mm-hmm. So this is something that we built. We've been working on this for nearly a year, north of a year, but we decided to finally release it because it's ready now for prime time.
And I guess then from that, you can export those as queries if you wanted to for scripting and automation and things like that.
Absolutely. You can build RESTful endpoints on that, and then you could use it as an app. And as I mentioned, the underlying platform is highly scalable, Chris, which means that you can hit it with thousands of queries per second if you wanted to, and it stays up.
That's an interesting feature. Yeah. So what other features were part of the latest release that in our short period of time you can mention that you think are worth mentioning?
Yeah. So remember I mentioned about business users and data scientists where we did no-code migration from relational database, and we did no-code graph analytics with Visual Query Builder. Let's come to the other end of the spectrum, Chris, where we have database administrators in Fortune 500 that are literally now deploying several tens of terabytes of data, right? So as you're deploying 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 terabyte of data, graph data, into a distributed cluster, because we are an inherently distributed platform, you need to be able to do that in minutes, not hours, right? So the functionality that we have added is about easier and faster deployment. Think of it as the harnessing that's required, operational deployment harnessing. We have improved it in this particular release so that you can do tens of terabytes of data in minutes. That's the first thing that we did for the database administrators. The other thing we did for DB administrators is we added user-defined indexing, but we added user-defined indexing with the semantics that's identical to SQL, because we wanted to make sure that if you are a database administrator for Oracle or DB2, you can literally use the same exact semantics to create the user-defined index or secondary index for TigerGraph. So those two features are really to improve database administrators' productivity for deployment and for indexing.
Okay. So not wanting to push you, now you've just had a new release, but what's on the roadmap for the next release?
If I told you, I would be in big trouble. But you know what? I'll promise you this, Chris. The minute I have a new release coming up, I'll come to you and I will brief you first. How is that? I'll give your readers, viewers, listeners a sneak peek at it.
Okay,
I offer that up.
Just to clarify, because I found it on the webpage as well for single developers who just are interested in experimenting to see how this might be useful, and then maybe taking it back to their companies. You do have what I see as a developer edition in Docker.
We do, yeah. So you can come to TigerGraph.
Yeah.
So you can go to TigerGraph.com. You have multiple options. You can click on Start Free button there. You can start with TigerGraph Cloud. There's no credit card required. So you get the free tier for lifetime as a developer. You can start building your application, no credit card required. You have multiple starter kits there for common use cases like fraud detection, knowledge graph, recommendation engine, machine learning related feature generation toolkit. Because one thing I did not mention today, Chris, for your viewers, is that we do native machine learning inside the platform, and you'll see a lot of toolkits, starter kits that are related to that. Again, those are free to use. You also have developer edition there on the site, which you can download for free. And again, it's lifetime free for non-commercial usage. We also have a webinar series called Graph Gurus. You'll find it on the site under resources, and you can sign up for a webinar. I'll just ask your listeners to just take TigerGraph Cloud for a spin and see how easy it is to use. Business users have been playing around with starter kits. About over 1,000 developers have already been building applications on it for fraud detection, recommendation engine, knowledge graphs, machine learning feature generation, where you generate training data based on graph analysis to make your ML better, machine learning better. There's a host of starter kits there. So, start playing around with the starter kits. There's a free chat session on the site, ask us questions, developer community that's very active that can help you. And we are always there to help you, regardless of whether you're a paying customer or you're a developer who is just starting out in the graph world. Our notion is to bring graph database and analytics to every single developer and every single business user and data scientist in the world.
That was my interview with Gaurav from TigerGraph. Hope you enjoyed that. What's been happening? Again, I'm finding it very difficult to keep up to date with what is actually happening. Many of the projects I mentioned last week are still in progress. We're actually going to be recording the first proper episode of the Board Game Jerk podcast tomorrow. I should say what day I mean by that. Thursday. Thursday the 29th, or whatever, of April. Storytelling podcast, we're still editing. It's coming together slowly. We would spend a lot of time working on tooling, really. I had a very productive weekend working on the Chip Shop game, the relaunch of the Chip Shop game. We actually should have some prototypes of that fairly soon. Also working on some roleplay game supplements. And I started my first solo gamer live stream. It was a little bit of a disaster, though, so I'm not going to tell you to go and look at it. But I am going to tell you that I'm going to do another one probably over the weekend, this weekend, so the first weekend of May, sometime in European time. So keep an eye on my YouTube channel or Twitch to see that. And hopefully the mistakes I made in the first one I won't make again. But that's live streams for you. You've got to learn, I suppose. I'm going to start my streams of developer experience teardowns very soon as well, possibly this afternoon, possibly tomorrow. Kind of fitting it in is the bigger challenge. And as always, I'm still offering office hours if you want help with your documentation projects. So I have a couple lined up for the next week, but there will be some more opening sort of second week of May. So, tweet at me or look at my pinned tweet if you want more details of that. So keep an eye on christianschiller.com. If you've enjoyed the show, please rate, review, and share it. And until next time, if you have been, thank you very, very much for listening and stay safe.